Welcome back to another episode of Build What's Next. I'm your host, Jason Rome. Continuing the conversation we've been having around how AI is changing how we build. Really excited to welcome back to the podcast today, Cory Voglesonger. Cory was back on in 2024 talking about culture, and we're going to revisit that theme and the framework that he leverages and how it's changed and how it's evolved during the age of AI. Really enjoy talking to Cory. He's someone I'm going to for ideas, that he implements and what he puts in on the ground. Cory is the Chief Product and Technology Officer for Aaron's. He owns the full technology estate there across product engineering, design, infrastructure, and IT, supporting over 1,000 stores, as well as a 180-person organization. Cory comes from a software engineering background, but as he'll say today, he'll talk about how good of an engineer he was always. But I think I really appreciate how much Cory focuses on culture, because we're seeing in this AI age how important that is and how a lot of organizations have a lot of baggage around how they've been able to empower their people. And as AI is unbundling or shifting roles and expectations, companies with a strong culture are going to have a clear advantage. So excited to learn from Cory today and have a conversation.
You are listening to Methods Build What's Next Digital Product Perspectives, presented by Global Logic. At Method, we aim to bridge the gap between technology and humanity for a more seamless digital future. Join us as we uncover insights, best practices, and cutting-edge technologies with top industry leaders that can help you and your organization craft better digital products and experiences.
Welcome back to another episode of Build What's Next. Really excited for this one today. I'm Jason Rome, your host, and I've got Cory Voglesonger with me, doing a bit of a thematic on where AI development lifecycle is, AI native delivery. I'll let Cory introduce himself, but plays a dual role across product and technology for his organization. And we're going to talk about what's changed, what's happened, what hasn't, and we're going to dive into the people element today. So culture, environment, individual coaching, and what he's seen, what he's learned, and some practical advice for leaders in their team. So, Cory, welcome back. Do you want to give a little bit of background, refresh? I think we were just debating if it's been 3 years or 5 years, but COVID and having families, who knows? So, welcome back. If you want to do an intro.
Yeah, thank you. Some amount of years for sure.
Exactly.
I'm Cory Voglesonger. I am the Chief Product and Technology Officer at Aaron's. I've been there an eternity, 18 years or so. I started in software engineering, and through lots of fortune and good opportunities and good people around me, have landed in a spot that I'm in now, which is the Chief Product and Technology Officer, as I mentioned. And really that scope is, most simply put, where technology and the customer intersect, through digital business, e-commerce, but also indirectly through the team members, the customer service team members interacting with the customer. So we enable those parts of our experience and journey. And I've got a team of product designers, product managers, engineers that do the real work.
And I've always appreciated in our conversations, going back to our last one, a lot of people talk about culture, but you do things that exemplify it. I think I've shared the story many times of you'll send engineers into stores. And I think a lot of people look at an engineer as how much code, how many tickets, how many PRs can we do? And you view them as a member of the team, which now with AI becomes even more important. So I'd love to hear, as AI adoption has come along, where are your teams right now? And maybe what's changed and what hasn't changed for you?
Sure. Yeah. So where we are, I would say we're very early. I don't even think we were. I wouldn't call us bleeding edge, cutting edge. We've done a lot of exploration around proof of concepts and trying things out through various stages of the life cycle. And some of those have borne fruit to where we've changed the way we work across some of those dimensions. We use AI-assisted engineering a lot. Coding agents to help us build code. Our product managers and designers heavily leverage AI to, create better outcomes in their work. We've got a few production use cases of agentic flows that are, call center related. But we're still very, very early. I think anybody that's not you know, uh, some massive big six company is probably very early as well. So I feel like we're kind of in the sweet spot where we're figuring it out, but we're doing it in a deliberate way that I think will build a foundation for us.
Yeah, yeah, you know, I talked to some companies; they're still figuring out if they can turn it on or not. So you guys are later than them, that's for sure. And having agentic flows in the call center is not something that everyone can say. A lot of people are still thinking about how to secure that. I want to dive right into the topic today. I've always appreciated the way you talk about culture. Can you introduce that framework, and then we'll use that to dive into maybe how that's had to evolve and how it hasn't had to evolve with
Yeah,
AI.
yeah. So the framework, as you mentioned, is called safety, clarity, and urgency. It's been something that, well, the origin. I'll just give you the origin story. Is I have uh, been at this craft for a while now, and through that have tried to be a student, reading and learning, and applying all the latest methodologies, frameworks, practices that help us and our teams do our best work. And whether that's continuous delivery, agile, lean, DevOps, design thinking, OKRs, what have you. There's a litany of uh, tools and practices out there to help us do our craft better. And after struggling myself with trying to make sense of it all and how to apply it, what should I be doing first, how to think about it, I kind of arrived at this insight. And, in my mind, it's this like really clarifying moment, but that's revisionist history. I'm sure that happened over the course of years that really all those three things, or excuse me, all of those practices, modern practices in the canon of modern product development are really trying to do one or more of three things for the people doing the work. And that is to make them feel safe, uh, doing the work, to make the work more clear and how they do their work, and to create urgency and working towards an outcome. And if you really distill down all of those practices, that's the core thing they're trying to do. And the why is that, the result is, people who feel safe um, and have the appropriate guardrails will take risks. They'll tell you the truth, and they'll raise issues before they're a big issue. People who have a lot of clarity in what they're trying to do, how they can go about doing it, and what's important, um, can move forward and adapt the plan without waiting for permission. And then people who have a lot of urgency, really give a damn about what they're doing and run hard towards achieving that goal. And so, if you think about all those practices, that's sort of this unifying construct or organizing construct that helps me think about. I don't have to be a master at all those things if I can break it down to those three elements. So it's really a diagnostic tool and a lens on which I think about how teams operate. I'll go into teams and ask them to talk to me about if there's some new practice they want to explore. How does it check the box on one of these three? Arrived at that, a few years back, started talking about it. It was valuable to me and teams and some others. And so, yeah, that's really the framework. And it turns out that, teams that work that way, typically stand a pretty good chance of competing and thriving in the modern world today, and the way work's done, where digital bits, are really the means of economic production. So um, that's the framework. As you would expect, and where I think we're going to go today is in recent months. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about what applies, what doesn't, as we start to think about enabling our teams with more AI technologies. And it's really interesting that it really still all works
Yeah,
pretty well. And it turns out that those things that, while AI certainly has changed a ton of things at a core principle level, when you think about how to organize your culture, um, not a lot's changed.
yeah. It, it's interesting. I like the framework for many reasons. I think it simplifies things. I've got when we do our assessments of companies, we look at 7 different things on culture because we're consultants, and we have to make it a little bit more complicated, obviously.
Three is always the right number, though.
It really is. And then But one of the things I like the word urgency. I personally like to use the word agency as well, but I think a lot of people, the word empowerment has kind of been the zeitgeist for a long time in product, and it's one of those words that's kind of come to mean everything and nothing, and it's not very certain. And you talk to five different people, and they have very different definitions of what they mean by feeling empowered within an organization. A lot of people fighting for that without clarity. But I think urgency, it's narrower and it's clear exactly what that means of, being actionable, taking ownership of something versus empowerment is this a little bit more of a softer word. I'd be curious your thoughts on how you landed on the urgency word, and then maybe we go into that one first in the age of AI and how it's changing.
Yeah, how I landed on it. I don't know. It just felt right.
Yeah,
I don't.
it's a good word.
I can make up a story, but I don't think I
I've
have
been
a good
stealing
one.
it. Yeah, it's great.
Because I think it. If to reflect on that a little more, I think it is representative. It does a good job at distinguishing between like frantic, hectic. We've got to hit this deadline. We've just got to run fast at all costs. Urgency aligns better with what the world calls outcome thinking, which is, you know, I can be told I have to get something done within a time frame, and that I'll have to move fast to do it, but it won't be targeted and directed towards an outcome often when we're handed those deadlines. And so urgency just better fits the idea of, in my mind, somebody who is self-motivated, has a lot of intrinsic motivation, understands the mission that they're up against, and is running hard towards it. You can do that urgently
Mhm.
with control. That's I think where I got to with it. And so when you think about, do you want me to? I'm going to jump into the AI part. What do you think?
Let's do it.
Okay. So when you think about, stress testing this urgency concept against what we're doing, what we're trying to do with AI in today's world, it's easy to go to, well, like I can, it just got really cheap to create stuff
Mhm.
through a certain lens, and we can create a lot more stuff. Um, I think that's the wrong lens, and it has been the wrong lens for a while. This is where urgency made sense before. If you think the orientation needs to be outcome, not to a specific output. So it's I want to be on the other side of the river, not wet, versus build me a bridge. That kind of thinking, you need to be working towards that. You need to have some metric that moves or something that is different in your business rather other than I just built a thing. So AI allows us to build a lot of things really, really quickly. And I think that's actually we're going to have to be more disciplined in that world around how do we arrive at what's the right thing.
Yeah.
And so it's so hard not to talk about the other topics when you get here because clarity is the thing that helps here. But
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at the intersection of safety, clarity, and urgency, you have that concept of ownership of, and talked about this in my podcast on Monday, but everyone's big on loops right now and getting over the hill and like that, kind of that vibe, and that's really what we're talking about is, can you point someone at an outcome, and can they get there? And one of the things I look at with a lot of teams is, do you have teams that um, and you see this a lot in enterprise where the team lets a road bump become a blocker. Or do they know how to get around like
right,
blockers and things that get in their way? Or is it like, all right, I'm stopped. I'll bring it up in stand up. I'll bring it up in PI planning. I'll bring up the problem to someone. Or do they figure out a solution how to work around it and bring that and put it in business context? And so one of the big things for urgency about me is do you raise a risk or do you bring a solution for the risk? And are you someone that can see around corner and predict the next thing that's going wrong and take accountability for it, which is where that clarity of that outcome comes
yeah,
in and aligns here. And I think you know at the end of the day with AI, it hasn't fundamentally changed the problem at all, the process at all. We have to frame problems, we have to explore solutions, we articulate a plan, we build it, we evaluate what we've built, and then we learn from putting it into production. And at the end of the day, I see a lot of articles right now, and and people are inventing a lot of new words because they don't want to use the word agile anymore.
Right.
But it's essentially they're rediscovering flow engineering, and it's just
Right.
Kanban with agents and a context layer. But a lot of organizations, if you threw AI out of the picture and said you're not allowed to do PI plannings anymore, and your teams have to run Kanban and they have to just coordinate with each other versus having an RTE coordinating for them, they wouldn't be able to do that. And so I think that's one of the problems is a lot of teams are, and a lot of and a lot of organizations have built teams to be gears in machines
Right.
versus people who are machines. And that's one of the tough things. I worked with a company, and we were helping them with their product organization. I said, well, you've taken the role of product, and you have a PM, you have a PO, you have a scrum master, you have a data team that looks at the actual data, and you have a research team. And so you've taken what might be in one person's head at other companies, and you've put it in 5 heads. And now they have to coordinate to all understand and all have judgment. But instead, you end up with a little bit of an elephant in the blind man, where everyone's got a piece of the puzzle, but it's very hard to coordinate and bring that across. And when code is abundant and when code is fast, you don't have time for that level of coordination, especially because one of the other, talking about culture, a lot of what we're talking about is cultural baggage that organizations are bringing into this new AI DLC. A lot of organizations were not really good at knowledge management in the first place.
Yep.
It's very tribal, it's very tacit versus explicit structured knowledge that is shared out. And they relied on the slowness of their process to slowly expose that knowledge and slowly make decisions and create clarity versus having to have clarity at the front end of the process. And so I think I just segued us into clarity accidentally, but I'll take credit for it.
It's hard to separate them, frankly, because they work so well together. They're self-reinforcing. But one quick thing on urgency, because you hit on it, that I didn't mention, but the Kanban and flow is the essence of lean applied to product development. We did this. We were trying to do this 7, 8, 10 years ago, and even before for some. That still matters, and it matters more because if you can't flow, and flow means, and lean, really the principle I'm talking about is figure out what's valuable to you in the marketplace, and strip away all the things that don't drive towards that value. And if you think about a world where producing is no longer the constraint, you've got to be really razor sharp and apply those lean principles a lot more deliberately um, to get to the right outcome, or else you will end up with a mountain of a bunch of features and things that make you feel good, but actually just add complexity to your environment.
And that's one of the problems that I see is a lot of organizations, they still hadn't quite figured out what type of seat they wanted to give product and engineering at the table for leadership. Now, SaaS companies are one thing, right? Because the product is what you're selling.
Mhm.
But even some of those companies, you're hiding a product team behind a business strategy team potentially. And so but there's been so much work to do that, a lot of product organizations became very much, requirements project manager, BA type roles of, hey, I take them the requirements from the business and I give them to the engineers, kind of that office space-esque thing. And now the business is like, we need to go faster. You need to be commercially minded. You need to be out talking to customers. And it's this new playbook. And not that they don't have the capabilities, but they haven't had the permission. They haven't had the time. And they don't have the support system around that. And so that's the only other thing I'd say about urgency is you can't just put urgency on your people. You have to figure out what are the things that block their time and cause friction and block flow, and how do we unlock that? So,
Yeah, it's the
for
values from thinking.
and a great example for AI to work well, you need a strong standardized tool chain and developer golden path, and you need a developer platform because that's the stuff that's going to block teams is, hey, I need to know the enterprise standard way of doing this so I don't reinvent the wheel. And if you don't have that, if you have people that have urgency, they're going to be pulling in new tools and new things into the stack. That's probably not going to get approved. And then you have to go pull that out later and you're going to end up with sprawl. And so thinking about how to support that developer experience or product experience, like supporting those folks enables urgency versus forcing destructive creativity where they're solving problems, but you're actually adding to the problem because you haven't been able to make those decisions for teams.
Yeah, you just described the whole continuous delivery and DevOps movement, and that's why this, idea of like everything's changed, nothing's changed is so sort of resonant to
But
me.
a lot of people aren't there still.
That's what I'm getting at is
Yeah.
like if you didn't do those things, if you didn't apply lean thinking to the way you work, if you truly weren't agile, and that doesn't mean you run safe, but like you adapt the plan based on results. If you truly didn't make the investment to make it really drop dead simple to deploy into production and detect if it's working or not, like you got to do those things still.
Yeah. Does AI, I haven't seen as much of it lately, but is AI the thing? Does it kill safe? Like, is safe? I mean, it was
I
already
think it
kind of
has to.
falling out of, a lot of organizations had slowly moved away from it, or they're running a version of safe, which really just meant they were doing PI planning or some kind of big room planning. But, it feels like it potentially kills it. Now, you still need coordination and some kind of scrum of scrums, and you need that sharing and you need those ceremonies, but I don't know.
No, I have no personal experience with safe. I never actually tried to apply it. But what I would say is probably you're right, but you're also a consultant and know that there'll be a new thing that we'll package up to sell to solve that problem.
Well, I think actually that's one of the dangers that I worry about is the, early on with AI, we're going off script, but that's why we didn't really write a script. So early on with AI, people treated this like a tool they were turning on, right? And they treated it like a part of the tool chain that they were enabling. And then you train people on how to use that tool, like a new observability tool that you would roll out or a new automated testing suite, right? That was kind of the mental model people had. But, your testing suite, at least, again, I'm not in QA. You'd probably know better than me, but I've never heard of someone having to turn off their testing suite because they burned through too much usage too quickly at the beginning of a month type situation.
No.
And, I would hypothesize most testing suites are not as expensive as the tokens that our engineers are burning through right now.
No.
And so, that's the other mindset shift that I'm seeing about rolling AI is, yes, in some places it's a tool that you train people on. But in other places, it's an investment where you have to ask yourself, where in our organization, if we added multiple new engineers and new capabilities, would the ROI be worth it so that we're applying it appropriately? Because I think a lot of people like, processes and tools tried to peanut butter the AI approach across, and the costs are very dynamic and the ROI is going to be very dynamic as well. So complete aside there, but I think that's a key thing is like, what's your mental model for rolling this out? And most people think about it like rolling out agile or rolling out automated testing, but it is a capital deployment of where we can have ROI and where we need to invest in the business.
100%. And that's a whole nother podcast probably. But what I would say to that is the best analogy, although it's not perfect, is when we started rolling out and working with public cloud. And my old boss used to have this saying is like, I don't want a Canadian cell phone bill. There was some story where he was in Detroit and his phone was roaming and he got like a $2,000 cell phone bill. So he taught us, I mean, that was a phrase that went through our head about having good hygiene, about how you think about managing that infrastructure. And so you mentioned that QA can't run through a budget. They can if your automated testing suite doesn't manage your cloud infrastructure well. And so some of that discipline, a lot of what I try to do is just see like, hey, this new thing, it's a lot like the old thing.
Yeah. I mean, and maybe QA is a good example, right? Because there was a lot of people that, if 80% test coverage was good, then 90% was better, and then 100% was best, and that's not true.
And it still broke on day one for something you didn't.
Yeah,
know.
So I think a lot of people, again, kind of going back to this concept of urgency. If we wrap this one, is don't confuse activity with progress. And so urgency is it's going to involve activity, but not activity for activity's sake. Like don't.
Gotta be outcome oriented. What are you trying to solve for in your business and your customer experience, and how do you determine quickly that you did or you didn't?
Yeah, which is a great segue into clarity. So let's talk about clarity. Mm-hmm. Has clarity changed at all?
I think this is I'm excited to jump in on this one because I think
you're excited on all of them always, and so that's why I like talking to you.
This is my craft, man.
Exactly.
I do this for a living. The clarity one, I think, it's like it slaps you across the face how obvious it is. Because the whole point of clarity is to give your teams the context. That's a key. You might have been hearing some about that word today, but give the teams the context, the ability to go out and do their best work and achieve the outcomes that you, as a leader, see are the things that are going to drive your business and your strategy and all the things. And so much, and that map to that, if we think about that, hey, I want to get across, telling a team, I want to get across the river and not be wet on the other side, instead of building a bridge, it's like applying that, but it's way more acute if you get it wrong when you've got an army of agents running in your environment. So take that analogy and say, well, really, like, what if we were telling an agent that, and you go, well, here's your goal. I want to be on the other side of the river. I don't want to be wet. Well, I want to be on the other side of the river. You got a compass and a map and some logs and some twine or whatever.
You're essentially MacGyver.
Those are your tools. And I need to be there by tomorrow, and I don't want you to spend more than a couple $100 to do it. Like, I just described an agentic loop.
Yeah.
The difference is, if I don't get it exactly right with a human, there's a good chance somebody's going to catch that. Now, if you've created safety, foreshadowing, they'll say something. If not, you're out of luck. But so it is, I think clarity is the one that, if we start thinking about agentic flows and agents being a better part of our workforce, a bigger part of our workforce and the work we do, this stuff is so vital. And you hear about prompt engineering was a thing. I hear you on the loops. If you're not doing loops today, you're missing out.
But they came out like last Friday.
I know. Prompt engineering. What's that about? Like, what makes a good prompt? Give it a lot of context. Make sure that you give it the guardrails and the context that it can do its job well. Context engineering is, I guess it's not, I don't know if it's still the buzzword, but like that was the next thing.
I think harness engineering is now the
is that the thing?
Yeah,
okay,
that's the buzzword as we sit here today in the middle of June. So by the time this podcast comes out, it'll be the wrong word, but that's okay.
Fair. So you get it. I mean, like, we've been I've worked personally. This is clarity is something that I try really hard to work on, because I think it allows teams to go do their best work. And like, I really believe in that. Like, you guys know better than me. There's certain things that I know that I think will be helpful, from my perspective, for you to know. And I try to be real intentional and deliberate about that, to the point that my team members, when they listen to this, will roll their eyes about how much I talk about some of this stuff. And explain things, but it's because that one person in the room that maybe hasn't heard me talk about it, here's the thing that helps them unlock something that gets us to a different solution than we were even thinking about. All of that matters, like 10x, 100x, 1,000x more when you're talking to an agent, which we're going to be talking to agents.
Yeah, we might have to slice this into its own podcast, because we're going to talk about this for a while. I mean, clarity, for me, being a consultant, clarity is one of the most important parts of my job, because, I work in small batches with a client. And so, like, chartering work very clearly of what their outcome is and what they want us to do and the role they want us to play is extremely important. And, a big part of what I'm normally doing, I always tell my teams, like, the first deliverable to every client is the proposal that states their problem really well and helps them give the process for solving it. And I think a lot of times internally, and to your point, because our processes moved slow enough, we could kind of hack our way through it through bureaucracy and conversations where, business hands something off, we give it a PRD, we go through X iterations, we go through Y iterations of design, but that's okay, because the backlog was huge, and the development team was busy anyways, and so we had time to work towards that. And so now we have a lot less time for that stuff. And one of my clients, he says one of the best parts about working with us is at the beginning of our project, we force his whole team to get in a room, and I ask them questions that they aren't usually allowed to ask each other, and it forces them to like get on the same page about clarity for what they're doing. And so being able to look at a problem, decompose it into multiple problems, track it back to business outcomes, understand the assumptions that we're making and where we need additional evidence is so critical. And there's a lot of documents that are called strategy or masquerading as strategy, which is really a set of activities instead versus a clear outcome. And I think, so I think a lot of people asking for bridges versus trying to get to the other side of the river. And with AI, what we've seen right now is engineers are getting so much more leverage initially because the tooling is built for them. And the market for coding is hundreds, if not thousands of times the size of the market for writing better PRDs. And so like, yeah, we've checked the box on like writing a PRD, though there's probably a question of whether we need PRDs at all. And I know you're going to want to answer that. So we could talk about it in a minute. But just the amount of throughput from the product team hasn't gotten as much leverage and hasn't increased. And if you take this whole AI thing to its logical conclusion and say, what's our bottleneck to flow? It is the proximity of teams to the problems that they need to be able to solve, where they can go find their own clarity and tie it back to a business outcome.
Yeah.
I was talking to someone this morning, and I've got a client that's done this actually. And one of the things I've proposed is, rethink your seating chart and org chart. Put your product and engineering team as close to the team that they are building technology for. So if you're building technology for the back office team, put them next to the back office team and let them have water cooler conversation. If you're building technology for the call center, put them in the call center and let them interface with those people and see them using it every day. If you're building store technology, like the team needs to go out and be in the store every day. And because I think that's going to be the biggest gap is how quickly can you get access to your user. And you and I talked about this when we were prepping for this is, yes, you can now make 10 A/B tests, but you're not increasing the traffic through those A/B tests. And so now you build synthetic data and run them through those A/B tests, but there's still going to be a gap of that true empathy. And so that clarity on the front end, I think it's not only that top-down commander's intent, but it's, do you have people that understand your domain deeply, where they are accumulating knowledge about their users and their problems, and do they have access to the data and the telemetry needed to make those decisions? And then do they have the permission to act urgently within a set of bounds and budget to solve those problems? And that is the true measure of clarity. Not, do we talk about our strategy once a quarter in the town hall?
It's very true. Yeah, and I'm listening to you, and this is right on theme where I'm certainly not an expert at any of that, but it's something that I haven't mastered it, but it's something we've been striving for quite some time now. Nothing you said has anything to do with AI other than it just amplifies if you aren't good at it. Shines a much brighter light on it.
Yeah. And I think that's actually one of the anti-patterns I worry about, where one of the reasons that I don't love AI for writing PRDs is, I think if you're an organization that's still writing some kind of PRD, AI can definitely assist you, but the act of writing is the act of codifying your own thoughts and understanding of something.
Mm-hmm.
And if you outsource that first task, now you're just hanging on. and if you let AI take that first step, even with a great context layer, AI is not going to fully understand your business, what you've built, what you've tried in the past, and who your users are. And, again, the tools are going to get better. You can do adversarial things, but the tools do have this kind of sycophantic nature. They do confuse quantity for quality quite a bit. And so I think it's very dangerous to introduce AI slop at step one. When that's that moment, you need clarity. There's a great book called How Big Things Get Done. And it's about program management, project management for everything from IT to like large building projects. And I love this quote that talks about thinking slow and acting fast. And a little bit of a play on Kahneman there.
Yeah,
the SEALs have their, their version of that, make haste slowly, that type of thing. And so taking the time to get in a room, get really well aligned early, And when we're not aligned, figuring out what evidence we need to acquire to be aligned, because now it's easier to prototype, it's easier to test, it's easier to go acquire that evidence is critical at the beginning of the process. And then once you get that right, everything can flow from there.
I got a lot to respond to there, but
Yeah.
before
Do you want to talk about the PRD thing first? Is that
no,
gonna bother you?
the first thing I want to hit on is I think you dropped book reference 1 and 2. They're our first book reference 1 and 2. So
Well, you
I'm
mentioned how many books you read earlier, so that was kind of like a book flex
That was a
already.
flex,
So I
okay.
figured I would jump in with some
right.
specific ones.
No, I'm going to pass on the PRD thing. What I will say is I have a slightly different perspective on you on the using AI to write your initial sort of product strategy and what you describe as real from a risk perspective in terms of getting it wrong. And I do think if you're not critically thinking about what it's producing and not giving it really good context and you just sort of pass through the output, that's a fail and not something that I would recommend you do at all. But I think I get you use the term AI slop, which is everybody knows what that is. I think you can not get AI slop and still have AI assist you in the writing piece. It's interesting for me because what you said to me is true, which is the writing process is a thought clarifying exercise. It has been for me forever. It still is. I just do that through writing the prompts really clearly and then adapting them. For me is how I've landed that. And turns out I get something usually better in half the time.
Yeah.
So,
And I think that's a key thing, though. And early on, there were some studies on this of the difference between like a senior person in their career versus a junior person using these tools. Of, senior people generally get the productivity boost while maintaining quality. They don't necessarily get a quality improvement,
Yeah,
except for the fact that there's a lot of people that couldn't make slides, and Claude immediately makes their slides look better. But then junior folks, they get the productivity, but they get a quality drop.
Hold on, are you mad about that as a consultant who prides himself on making slides?
No, I'm all in on markdown files now. The markdown file is the new output. And so I think because you have expertise and you can critically look at what the AI says because you deeply understand your domain, like it's an accelerator for you. I think, when people use it as a shortcut for a domain they're not familiar with,
it's obvious pretty quick too.
It's obvious very quickly.
Yeah.
And so, the practical advice I give my team is twofold. Is one, own your outline. Even if you're not writing everything, like outline all the things you need to say and what you want to learn and how you want to do that. And then two is, think of AI in thirds. 1/3 advise you, 1/3 assist you, 1/3 be an adversary to you. And so just as important as helping you write it, know what your weaknesses are when it comes to product. Like for example, my MVP definition is usually a little bit too ambitious. And so I know that I need to cut anything that I put out there by 20% and kill 20% more features. I can have an adversary go through and say, let's talk about which 20% we're going to cut. Because I know that's something that I'm probably going to do and it needs to be done. So like know what your weaknesses are.
Yeah, that's a good point.
If you're not good at thinking about edge cases, have an adversarial agent that goes through and pushes you on edge cases. And so learn about who you are as a product person and build the right agentic frameworks to support you as you're going through to help you with your own bias. Because one of the things that I'm seeing is as team sizes get smaller, big teams where you have a diversity of people with different backgrounds, different thought processes, they eliminate some of that bias because there's so many different people looking at something. As a team gets smaller, you potentially concentrate bias within that team, and you need to use AI to look at the problem through lenses that your team might not be looking at it. So, I think it hits on that clarity of, using AI to challenge your own thoughts to get to clarity. And that's an uncomfortable thing at first, but that's such a huge unlock for me is that adversarial type view.
Yeah. Yep. Because I know who that person is in my organization and they just don't have to be sitting with me. I can do it without them there.
Exactly. I mean, I do that with some of the executives I work with of, when it comes to clarity. I had this conversation this week. I said, 3 pages. Let's build a markdown file that codifies your commander's intent for what the strategy is. And then with that, actually, the other thing I'm finding really important is to hold anti-positions. What is our strategy not? Because I think AI has decreased the cost of ideation and pivoting so much that it's so easy to drift from that clarity over the course of the project and follow AI where it takes you, or end up with feature proliferation, that type of thing as we
Never
go
make
through.
or decisions, just make and
Yeah.
decisions.
And so, synthetic personas, synthetic buyer personas, like adversarial strategy relationships. So if I'm working with someone who's an executive who I know is busy, is like, hey, let's codify your beliefs and heuristics and strategy into a skill that your team can run, so that, it's like you're looking over their shoulder as they write a PRD, but you don't actually have to be there.
Yeah. Yep. We're
Cool.
still in clarity, right?
We're still on clarity, if it wasn't clear.
Yeah. This is my favorite one. They're all my favorite kids, but this is my real favorite one.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Wink, wink. Yeah. Anything else to close on clarity before we move to safety?
I think it's just something, and it again, they blur lines. Something that you mentioned that I think it's maybe something that I've been doing in this space that I think is maybe a little more practical than the theory here is, you touched on this, which is if we're thinking about flow, which is delivering, left to right value in line with how the customer in your business sees it, in an optimal way or an increasingly optimal way. If that's how we're thinking about things, the concept there that you applying lean thinking is like, where's your bottleneck and how do you increase throughput through the bottleneck? And when I think about that, we can create, like, the cost to create things, as we've talked about, has just exorbitantly gone up. Sorry, the cost has come way down. We're creating way more. But you still can't, your production environment, your users, can't consume that level of change. And so you're making yourself feel good that you're building a lot of things and going, why can't we get this in production? When really it probably shouldn't be in production, or even if it should, you won't be able to get a clear signal on if it's the right thing or the wrong thing. And so you're really constrained there. That's a bottleneck. I don't know that you can do a whole lot to change that one, other than, use the science-based approach where you need it, do good enough in other spots. What's an A/B test, what isn't, those kind of things. But in general, it takes a little while to know if the thing worked or not. It just does. And so where that pushes, what I think is the biggest bottleneck is, how we figure out what are the right bets to go after, knowing that we've got a lot of bullets, but we can't take a lot of shots. And so we really want to aim and calibrate those. And this is where I'm pushing my teams the most to leverage AI, is like, how can we gain increasingly more confidence that we've got a pretty good answer to this problem before we get in production and have to play the game of statistical significance is going to take as long as it's going to take. I can't speed that up. AI can't speed that up. So that gets you thinking about the synthetic personas to get early reads and prototyping. And on the product side, it's, using AI to go stress test and your ideas and all the ways we talked about. And it also includes stop thinking, and this isn't new to me and not new, stop thinking about engineers in utilization terms and think about them as just a team member, and and them being a part of helping to understand and shape that bet is better than them piling up a bunch of code that can't get into production. So
Exactly.
I'm sort of force fitting this one into clarity because there's some clarity in here, but I wanted to pull on the thread that you mentioned about the production piece before we moved on.
Yeah, no, working in a lot of organizations, it's always funny looking at what their definition of done is, because, at a team level, their definition of done is like feature complete and like test pass. And then there's usually another organizational level of done, which is, hardening, SID testing, security testing, right? Which is like, hey, it's fully tested. It's, fully deployed, ready to release, right? It's on master. And then sometimes they have a third definition of done, which is like, hey, it's GA, it's released, it's whatever it is. But rarely do I see someone with the definition of done of like, we've achieved our goal. So again, it's a lot of people that done is the bridge, not done someone's walked across it. And, with AI, we should be spending a lot more of our time admiring our work and seeing if it's doing what it needs to do. And again, that comes back to the proximity of users. And that's one of the fun things, for me, like using this on personal projects, is I'm my first user. And so I immediately go from code to UAT, to code to UAT, and eventually bring someone else in. And, I've always said my favorite two moments in the product development lifecycle are user feedback and demos. And with AI, if you're doing it right, like that's all there is.
Right.
And the whole thing is awesome. And so like that, it should be, it should be really fun again. And like that's one of the cool things with AI.
It
So
is very fun. I get to build again in ways. I mean, that's why I got into this game, is I like to create stuff. And
I hear that from so many executives of, I got into this game to build things, and what I turned into was a budget manager. And I think it's fun again, and in a lot of ways. And to close out the point on clarity, one of my favorite questions when it comes to like release and thinking about releases is making sure you have clarity on, at what point will we have something that is better than what we have today, where it's worth it for our users to adopt it.
mm,
I think that's a really clarifying question for me, because as people start working, it's just human tendency. People start getting obsessed with their future state vision, and they lose track of where their users are today. And really knowing, like, what is a minimum kind of adoptable, better experience for our users, so that one, you don't undershoot it and just release stuff that you find valuable, but it's not really valuable for your users, or you keep product on the shelf for too long where it could be valuable to your users because you're pursuing perfection. So let's pivot to safety.
let's do it.
So start us off.
Yeah, I'll set it up again. There's really two aspects to as I originally thought about it, the safety side, two sides of a related coin, and it's psychological safety, which is do people feel free to speak their mind, to tell the truth, to take risks. This is not my research. There's a wealth of research out there, obviously, that speaks to the value of this. And that's one side. So how do you get people to feel comfortable to do those things in your environment? And that's key to this overall, what you said, ownership that sits in the middle of all this. Without that, you're never going to own the problem. They're never going to own the opportunity and problem. And then the other side of the coin is, how do you make it more safe for the teams to do their work, where they are well protected against big impact, high impact, I call large blast zone type problems. And so I think both of those have. This is the one that I think maybe bent the most. Everything else held pretty firm and amplified. This is one that bends a little bit, but I still think it works really well. When you talk about safety, what I'm finding is, rightly so, people have a healthy bit of concern, angst about what this does for them over time. I do too, frankly. I've got mixed feelings on the what it means to humanity, and there's good and bad. That's true, I think, for a lot of folks, and I'm finding that a lot of folks on my teams. And so that leads to some hesitancy, I think, in adopting some of these tools sometime, because there's concern about it's going to replace my job. There's concern about how will we not screw up? How will we do it in a way that we don't screw up customer data somehow, or have some big compliance issue? And there's a lot of fear around it. And so I think finding ways, so that psychological safety around those issues is still really, really vital. It's incredibly vital in a world where AI sits at the center of our work. But the ways you go about it is maybe a little bit different. And I think the biggest thing that I'm doing on that front is just being empathetic to that and leaning into that. I don't know where all this ends up.
Yeah.
Nobody does. And I think just letting people hearing that and listening to concerns, feeling heard. So I've done, over the past month or so, I've gone to every product team and held just let's talk about it session, where I try to be candid and honest with them about my feelings, and then kind of put a reframe on it of, we all have mixed feelings. There's good and bad in this, but like, AI doesn't care, and it's here to stay. And so the position I'm taking is that circle of influence, circle of control. Let's get really damn good at using it. And that's been empowering. So I think that's an example of how psychological safety maps to this world, just as well as it did when we were talking about all the things, stepping on people's toes. The only difference now is like, this is the first time, and I've said this, where like engineers kind of did this to themselves,
Yeah.
which I think is interesting. But
yeah, the example I always use was, Taylor wasn't working on a factory floor when
No.
he came up with Taylorism and scientific management. So
solid reference.
you can't do a modern product podcast without a Taylorism
no.
reference. So yeah, I mean, a lot of things there. I'll say first on the psychological safety and the intersectionalism of these values. I think the intersection of safety and clarity is very underrated, because I think when you have really high safety but really low clarity, you spend a lot of time with opinionated debates that go nowhere. Because it's a lot of people that feel safe to share their opinion, but it's not grounded in a clear strategy.
And the urgency that like we got to decide and move.
Exactly, and especially when code is abundant. I've been in design debate reviews that is 5, 6, 7 people, takes half hour, an hour, and I'm sitting there and I said, I could have coded both of these options, and I could be going out and finding a user in the time it took us to have this conversation. And so like that clarity, and then also the culture of let's use these tools to like find evidence. And one of my other favorite questions to ask each other is always, what would have to be true for this to be the right decision, and like how do we go find evidence versus I think there's a lot of people with very strong opinions and very different taste in this space, and a lot of people with perspectives on what is right, and what looks good. It's the reason when an engineer goes look at another engineer's code, they always want to refactor something. A designer goes look at another designer's thing, they always want to change something, that type of thing. So I want to talk about that intersection on this environmental thing. I'm same as you. I think really empathize with people, especially because and the reason I got into this space, right, is it's one of the coolest jobs in the world. And it should be one of the most fun jobs in the world, because you never have the same day twice. And you get to make an impact on people, and you get to solve problems, and you get to work with a lot of really other smart people. And a lot of people that get into this, and this is true of most jobs in America, and complete tangent, but as we've seen decline in different kind of community organizations, like work has become a big part of identity for people.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people that AI is going to take jobs. Great, we'll put basic income in place and we'll tax people. And I think it misses the larger point of like identity and
who
like
am
the
I?
importance of that, and all of that, which is definitely another podcast, because we'd have to talk about a whole lot of different stuff to tackle that issue. But that empathy is key. And I don't think we helped it where the people that were so close to this technology in Silicon Valley were prognosticating 90% of code will be automated and 50% of jobs will be eliminated. And I don't know if those ended up on Polymarket, but they definitely would not have been winners at the time. And so I think as this technology is suffused, we're seeing that okay, it's going to be a minute. There's going to be more jobs. I think actually it's the classic, as a good becomes cheaper, there becomes more demand for it. There's actually going to be more opportunities. We're seeing a need for a lot more product folks. And so, but we definitely didn't help ourselves with that at the time. And so I think that environmental safety and helping people, like that being said, this is not just a technology you roll out and you give someone a training and they understand. So for all of us in this space, there does have to be personal ownership of you're playing with these tools on the side. You're learning
absolutely.
them. You're keeping up with your education. It's your employer is not going to be able to keep up with the technology change to be able to help you keep up with it. But then also, for me, working across a ton of clients, you can see the same data in the Wall Street Journal, wherever you read, but I'm not seeing AI allow people to do tons of layoffs or anything. If anything, it's hesitancy maybe to hire until they understand the value of it. But I think there was a couple of really big, high profile situations. But then the counterpoint is always, were those companies that had just overhired compared to the amount of innovation capacity they needed. And this was a correction and AI was the excuse versus the actual. And so, but AI not disrupting jobs is not an interesting headline grabbing story. So
I think it's one of those that it's like, as most things, the truth's somewhere in the middle, and that, and this is what I share with my team is like you know if you really enjoy writing brackets, curly braces, semicolons, and the way you do your job, like this might not be for you in a while. If the actual act of writing machine language code is your thing and where you really root your identity to, this won't be probably something you're going to enjoy. However, if you can flip your brain or reframe a little bit to say, I still do my craft, I still write code, but I do it in plain language, and I understand how to engineer and architect a large scale digital service better than a vibe coder that's wrote a habit tracking app.
Yeah.
So
Which we needed 100,000 habit tracking apps.
So that that I think is representative of this change. Is you've got to rethink your identity and embrace this technology and the ways of working with it. What my message is like, hey, software is still the thing that's driving the economy, and it will be. It just happens to be through large language models now too. And you have first movers advantage of people who know how to craft software. You should take advantage of that and learn to harness these tools, because businesses will, and this is where I say the truth's in the middle. I've worked in a business for a while. They will, where there are opportunities to create efficiencies, they're going to take them, and they should. That means jobs are going to change, jobs are going to get eliminated, new jobs are going to get created. How all that nets out, nobody knows. But what I do know is that if you don't know how to harness this technology 2 years from now, you're going to have a harder time finding a job.
Which isn't a new thing. So,
No.
What do you think about the fall of the semicolon and the rise of the M dash as a name for this podcast, by the way?
I
love it. And people will just think it's a grammar podcast on punctuation in the age of AI. So.
Perfect. That is the nerdiest joke I've ever heard.
I've had worse, which is, for those who know me, is the most believable statement that will be uttered on this podcast. It's the only thing that, we're not going to have to fact check after we come to this. Yeah, I think with safety, like the environment is key. And there's a lot of great articles. I haven't checked them lately, but when this first came out about, this technology having an uneven impact on people of different ages, people of different genders, and like the socio impact of this, the impact on cognitive load and how people think about this. I do think to your point around, people that like to understand the code at a deep level, probably 5-10 years from now, there's going to be a lot of companies looking for people that like really understand computer science and like how code works and how it's written to be able to like debug and go deep into some of these systems. Again, the models are getting better, though. I think for most companies, we're at a diminishing return of like how much they need the models to get better for a lot of what they have to do on a day-to-day basis. And, who knows where the cost of all this stuff is going to go. And obviously that's going to have a huge impact after some of these companies start going public and we figure out how much they want to value margin versus market share and how they prioritize that and what's subsidized and what's not once it's publicly traded. So there's going to be a lot of change. And, anyone who says that they have it figured out perfectly is definitely not telling the truth.
Right.
And so I think it's one of those things. It's going to be a busy couple months, and it's going to continue being that way. And
couple months,
couple years. And I do think that's the last thing I'll say about safety is, being empathetic of your people, being empathetic of what these like tools do to folks, and the amount. Like, there's always been this upper limit, anyways, around the amount of thought work that someone can do in a day. I think it's like 6 hours or something. We will have to fact check that one. And AI takes away a lot of the rote toil and tasks, but that means you're always on. And, I've ended up in situations where I've got, I'm working on, one project with Claude. I've got 2 other agents working on, coding something, and I'm switching back and forth between that, and it's exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the AI brain fry is real. I think, again, one of the shames is this would be a great time for us to look at the 40-hour work week, I think, real hard. And that, that's one of the nice things, if I had a wish list of what would come out of some of this. But I think there's still a lot of people that are being told to do more with less right now. And hopefully AI helps with that. And I hope people are able to benefit from the productivity that comes with AI, not just the companies, and we're able to leverage that as well. And I think that'll help a lot with safety. And I think, employers and people like yourself that are making people feel comfortable and can retain talent, especially talent that knows their domain and has the knowledge of how things work extremely well. I actually think that's going to be a pretty big competitive advantage, because they see, they're able to look at an engineer and see what they're able to do from a business value perspective, and not just the number of PRs that they have. And they have that mindset, and they're able to make that switch. So I think that's going to be critical.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing that hasn't changed here is, while AI is an incredible tool at production, humans still have to make judgment around, is it the right thing? And that will continue. I think if we talk about software engineers specifically, or product people, they have domain expertise around their craft that they need to overlay on top, and will need to. Companies need to recognize that, and they do. And so I think that that's going to play out to where maybe the demand supply works out to where we create more demand. I think there's likely a scenario for that. But what I am trying to do is to unlock people. It's basic change leadership. That's what it is. It's unlock people to unfreeze and just start moving forward in a direction. And it's, what can you do today? All that's big and scary stuff is out there.
Yeah.
What can you do today that gives you a better chance?
Create safety to unlock urgency.
Yes.
We close the loop. I think that's a great end message to wrap it. So thanks, Cory, ton for the time today. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Appreciate
it. Thanks for inviting me.
Awesome.
Thank you for joining us on Build What's Next, Digital Product Perspectives. If you would like to know more about how Method can partner with you and your organization, you can find more information at method.com. Also, don't forget to follow us on social, and be sure to check out our monthly Tech Talks. You can find those on our website. And finally, make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on any future episodes. We'll see you next time.